Uh, Good morning, everyone. September 24th. It's Josie. Can you just confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Super.
We're having some audio issues today with WebEx itself. It's allowing people to connect with their computers, but it's not letting people call in to connect their audio. So we may have a little issue, but we're trying to work with ITS to fix it.
Okie dokie. Well, that's always a new feature in terms of our remote work. I see that we are still having attendees increase, so I'm just going to give it another minute or two. And I can see that folks have successfully logged in as panelists who are members of the Ddac, and I can see that there are also folks who have logged in to attend. So why don't we just give a few more moments to allow for folks to participate.
Josie, this is Donna. Can you hear me? I'm just testing my audio.
I can hear you, Donna.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, Raj. Hi, Raj.
So we've achieved a relatively stable number then of attendees and panelists. So I think it would be appropriate to begin. This is Roger Bearden, Executive Deputy Commissioner at OPWDD, welcoming folks to this quarterly meeting of the Developmental Disabilities Advisory Council. And we have joined by members of the committee, the council that is, once again remotely, as we continue our journey towards virtual meetings. We'll do our very best to accommodate folks as we navigate the technology. And as those of you who may have logged in just right at the 11 o'clock hour, there appears to be a challenge right now with audio-only call-ins, and that is something that I think the WebEx folks are trying to solve as we speak. So very much apologies to anybody who's having that challenge, but hopefully we'll be able to resolve that. That I think would conclude the welcome and update portion of the agenda. And then to move to a COVID-19 update, certainly want to acknowledge that it's been a few months since we've been together as a group, the Ddac, and there are multiple communications mechanisms that OPWDD has employed and is employing to try to communicate our progress in the fight against COVID-19, both as an agency and in collaboration with our other state partners. So I won't necessarily belabor that point terribly. I just wanted to give an opportunity for the Ddac committee members to ask any questions, provide any information that they wanted to provide. Certainly at the phase we are at right now, as we have gone over the mountain, and we are in a phase of relatively low infection in the OPWDD regulated service system. We are engaged in substantial preparatory work to plan in the event of a second wave, and to make sure that we benefit from the information and the experience that was learned in the first wave, starting back in early March, to continue this fight. So I wanted then just to give an opportunity to the Ddac members who may choose to provide any kind of comment or question with respect to COVID-19, obviously respecting that that has been a major topic of conversation throughout the public health crisis. Are there any members of the Ddac that have any questions, thoughts, observations, concerns that they wanted to raise at this point on the COVID-19 agenda item? Sounds like that's a no. I'm going to give it 3 more beats just in the event that somebody's struggling to get themselves off of mute, as we, or I particularly sometimes struggle to do. Okay, certainly.
Roger, can you hear me? It's Michelle.
We can hear you now, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Hi. I just wanted to let you know, I've only been able to join via my cell phone. When I'm trying to get on via my laptop link, it's not letting me on. So I'm not sure, I can't even really see if we have all of our participants here or not here, because there's definitely a problem with joining the meeting that's going on.
Yeah, right now we're showing that we have 20 panelists, which are, which are folks who would be in the presenter mode, which would include all of our Ddac members as well as members of our leadership team who might be called upon to provide information. So I know we're having some technical difficulties. It's something external to OPWD. It's something within the WebEx program itself. So we're doing our best to solve that. But I do appreciate the input, Michelle. It's unfortunate.
And can you clarify, because when I was trying to get on, I wasn't completely able to focus on what you're saying. Are you going to provide? Are we going to hear an update from staff, or is this the agenda item you just want to hear from us?
I just wanted to hear from you. I mean, if there are, there have been a frequent, updates. I think that the update I wanted to give is obviously that we're in, and I know you, as well as a number of the Ddac committee members, do participate in other stakeholder discussions, which are geared towards, providing timely information around the COVID-19 response. The intention behind this item on the agenda was to certainly acknowledge that that's been a significant reality for all of us, including those who touch the OPWDD system, and to give an opportunity for any conversation or discussion that the Ddac committee members had, acknowledging that, certainly folks would be familiar already with the multitudes of guidance documents that have issued, the multitude of phases in terms of both the closing of the day programs and the suspension of visitation, and and the home visits, and then the resumption of those activities now. So I just wanted to give an opportunity in the event that any of the Ddac committee members had questions or concerns that they wanted to raise as part of their advisory role, that they could do so at this moment.
Okay. So I'm surprised if we don't hear from people, because I know that there have been, and it makes me a little worried about the technology, just because, I know that there's been conversations, and a desire to have some more information about, what's actually happening in regards to the provision of services on the ground with the, the most recent guidance documents and, changes that have been made in terms of what can be open and not. Some of the things that I hear from people, relate to, where are services being provided, like how many services have resumed, how many people are being served with the services they were previously receiving. There's also a lot of conversation about what's happening for folks who are trying to get eligibility for OPWDD services right now, and whether that is moving forward in the COVID environment as it used to, or, what might be the current status about that. And then, looking at our agenda, I think, items about budget and fiscal sustainability of the providers is also obviously, top of mind for everyone. So those are, I'll be quiet and see if other people can kind of jump in. I would be surprised there'd be no comment on that agenda item.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Dolores McFadden is putting into the chat, I'm having audio issues. So, once again, those of you who know me know that tech is not my specialty. So I know that there are folks who are working on it presently. So let me just take note of the three things I think you mentioned, Michelle. One is what I would call the business process of being able to access services through the regional office processes. The second is what is in fact open or opening in terms of services that may have been suspended or limited during the pandemic. And then the third has to do with budget issues, which would partially be covered in with a waiver amendment update, but we can certainly speak to that now. And once again, okay, so why don't, if I could, once again, I'm trying to navigate this, and apologies. Abiba, are you on the line?
I am, Roger. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, so you at least have audio, which is a positive. I thought perhaps you could address the first question around, the RO access to services, like the business processes.
Absolutely. So we have maintained staff in the regional offices, and certainly there are some that work remotely, but our staff have continued to authorize services, determine eligibility for folks who reach out through the front door. Those activities have never been suspended. We know that we've received some feedback from providers and some families about some of the rules associated with service authorization in light of COVID, and we've certainly attempted to clarify those concerns or those misunderstandings, but all of the activities related to service authorization, front door, eligibility, service amendment remain in effect, and we encourage folks to reach out to our regional offices if there are specific concerns related to accessing services.
Thanks, Abiba. I'm hoping you might also be able to address the second question, which is the question around what programs have reopened. I think we've been collecting some data on that topic that would be useful perhaps to share with folks.
Sure, Roger. I mean, we know that a number of providers have reopened their site-based programs. Folks have submitted safety plans based on the guidance documents that we had issued, I think maybe about 2 months ago. And we also know that there are a number of providers that are still working on their safety plans to reopen site-based day program. We are going to be issuing a survey to collect information more specifically so that we understand what providers sort of numbers look like, in terms of the people that they were supporting pre-COVID and certainly now during the pandemic, to give us a better sense of where the gaps are and what sort of programmatic flexibilities need to be in place to better address those issues. But we know that there are a variety of programs across the spectrum that have opened, from respite to pre-voc to site-based day program and without walls programs. We have heard from families and certain individuals about challenges related to returning to their site-based day program. I'm not sure if folks are aware, but we did have a quarterly care management meeting on the 16th, where that was considered a hot topic and really spoke to the care managers to sort of underscore and emphasize their role in helping individuals who want to return to their site-based day program, making sure that a person-centered process is followed. And so as we gather additional information, we can certainly share that with folks. Roger, I'm not sure if you were speaking, but we can't hear you.
The mute button. Thank you very much for that, Aviva. So I can see that there are a number of comments coming in the chat box. What I'm going to try to do is near the end of the agenda, see if we can't piece those together and try to provide some information there. It's a little challenging to manage, but we're going to see what we can do so that we can get those comments addressed in over the course of our time together. So I think the third question, Michelle, had to do with provider viability. I don't know if you wanted to kind of articulate that in more detail.
Hi, sure. You know, I think that obviously everybody is operating in a, you know, not a great place to be operating from, which is really kind of a sense of fear, panic, desperation. There's been, you know, a series of budget actions that have been taken. There were concerns about provider viability and fiscal sustainability, you know, back to the first bump in the road, you know, when the retainer day payments needed to end. And, you know, my understanding in talking with providers is, you know, there's been huge outlays of cash in response to the COVID crisis. And since then, you know, and there was some support provided obviously to them in terms of getting PPE and whatnot, but the budget actions have all put everybody in just an even tighter squeeze. And, you know, we know that before COVID, there were problems with getting services to people because of workforce issues. You know, we've been having those conversations for years. And now, you know, we're in this situation with 20% withholds, the budget actions that are going forth on October 1st. And there's, you know, the people running the organizations are operating from a panic mode, and the families, you know, are also worried about whether providers are going to continue to be able to provide services. And I can't wrap my head around an outcome other than there's going to be some fiscal crashes, and there are going to be providers that close as a result of this. And I know that you know, like you know, what gets done at the budget, you know, what you get told you need to do is what you have to do. But what are we doing for planning for people? You know, I think it's important for everyone to know what's being done for planning for people who, you know, might end up being served by agencies and providers that are going to have to discontinue some of their services and or all of their services. And these are the things that, you know, families are worried about and talking about. And you know, I think that there needs to be some conversation about that. And I'd also be remiss not to just say that, you know, families are having their own personal fiscal pressures because of COVID. You know, people aren't working, they're not working as many hours. You know, maybe the type of job they were doing, they can't even do anymore. They certainly have pressures in regards to services aren't being provided. So some people, you know, can't even work because they're, you know, providing care for their loved one. And I don't think, the last thing I'll say is that in anything that we're doing, I really do not think that OPWDD and the governor's office and the Department of Health and everyone involved in this can lose sight of the fact that if it were not for families who had their you know, were taking care of their loved ones through the worst, you know, this crisis that we've experienced to date, where would OPWD be, you know, if it wasn't for those families stepping in and keeping people safe and providing the services that could not otherwise be provided by the more traditional models that we've always had. So we have to recognize that families are an unpaid part of the service delivery system. They're a backbone to it, and you know, all of these actions end up impacting them, and we do have to think about how we can support those families and how we can make sure that we're planning that if there's going to be a fiscal crash, how do we get as much service as possible to them and make sure that there's some continuity of care. Those are the things I'm concerned about.
There's a lot in what you said, Michelle, and absolutely the focus, you know, given these extraordinarily challenging fiscal times, is always how do we support individuals and families? Where can we, if we need to make budget cuts, where do we do that in a way that creates the least impact on the services that families and individuals are benefiting from? And, you know, one of the things that we were able to preserve, despite some of the budget actions that have been undertaken, is the DSP wage increases that were contemplated in the enacted budget. So, you know, that's something where, you know, we believe that, you know, that kind of support is vital. So where we do need to make those cuts, you know, we're looking where we can do that in the least damaging way. Obviously, you know, any cut is a challenge, and it's one that you know, we must navigate. Can I think Margaret Puddington, if I'm not mistaken, has her hand up.
Yes, I do.
Thanks, Margaret.
Hi, Michelle, that was very well said. I completely agree with all of the concerns. That's what's on everyone's mind, is what's going to happen when agencies can no longer provide services. I wanted to just ask whether OPW is going to collect data on any possible infections with the reopening of the day services. Is that going on now? And I mean, I know day programs are underattended at this moment, but as attendance increases, it's going to be critical to know specifically where any hotspots emerge, or
No,
even not hotspots, even just cases.
absolutely. And Margaret, I'm glad that you brought that up. So our data tracking on COVID infection, something that was put in place, you know, in early March, allows us to know when there is either an infection or presumed positive, whether there is isolation or quarantine. So when we learn of that event, we are able then to deploy our DQI staff. And I'm seeing, Leslie, you look like you're both on the panel and unmuted, if I'm seeing correctly. So maybe you could speak to kind of how we take that information and take action.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. Margaret, yes, we have reporting for all of the programs in our service system. And as you know, we put some things in place in IRMA to collect data. We use things like reports of positives at our certified sites to go out and visit them. And we have been doing that with the residential sites because the day programs have been closed, but we are working to be able to also do that with our day programs. And in addition, we're looking at just being careful and setting out kind of an organized manner to report these, because now we're dealing with people who this may affect more than one program. So we absolutely are preparing for that. Day programs are reporting exposures. As we speak, we are getting that data.
Thank you. Good.
Are there other hands up from members of the Ddac? Any comments that folks want to offer in terms of on the COVID-19 update agenda item. Donna, and it looks like Donna, you look like you're muted. Now you're.
I'm trying to figure the technology out. I just want to follow up to Michelle's comment. So Michelle and Dolores, who's going to present later on, I think, around the waiver amendment recommendation or the DDAC recommendations. We mostly focused on the waiver amendment in terms of the committee's work, but a lot of Michelle pointed out was discussed in the subcommittee because the recommendations with respect to the waiver and the K waiver extension. So I'm wondering, and I don't want to put Michelle or Dolores on the spot, but whether or not the systems subcommittee could take some of the issues that Michelle identified and make some recommendations to the council.
So I think that's maybe a recommendation for you to discuss internally, if I'm understanding.
Yeah, I mean, and would you? I mean, I'm assuming that you would, if the council, right, if the subcommittee could take some of those issues on to make some recommendations to the full council, because Michelle identified a lot of issues that came up, particularly from family members and some providers at the system subcommittee. So I think they were all very important issues that she raised. So I'm just wondering how we could add to potentially some of the recommendations to address some of the concerns.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. We're all ears. Absolutely. Okay.
Roger, it seems Dolores just sent me a message that she's been trying to raise her hand. Is Josie able to?
I see that now, Dolores. Yes, I'm sorry. It's me trying to navigate between multiple spots. Yeah, Dolores, please go ahead. No, you're muted, Dolores.
I'm not sure she's been able to get connected to the audio.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, Roger, she sent a chat message saying that she was having difficult getting audio. She's sending chats to you and Josie.
Okay, yeah.
This is Josie. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do on my end.
Josie, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, could you put in the chat box for them? I was having a terrible time getting in, and I finally did the you call me option, and that was the only thing that seemed to work. So maybe you could make a note for those folks and see if that works for them.
I'll do that right now. Thank you, Kate.
So
Roger, could I suggest that the issues that Michelle raised, and to Donna's point, and given the technical issues here, is that we regroup the system subcommittee, put these recommendations in writing. We can send them out to the council, get them to raise any issues or questions they have, and then do a vote to formally submit them to OPWDD. Does that make sense, following the guidelines that you had shared?
I think that does make a lot of sense. Thank you, Nick.
Okay.
Maybe, and as I said, we're going to take a look at the chat room. Yes, go ahead.
Roger, it's Michelle. And the weird thing that's going on, just as an FYI, I want to say it out loud. I can send a message to the chat, but I can't see the chat. So I just want people to know that I cannot see the chat. And this is Michelle. Dolores really wants to speak. So she texted me and asked if I could call her on my other line and put her on speakerphone to you guys. So we're going to try that to see if she can.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is a problem outside of OPW that the WebEx system seems to be not working very well. This morning. I just don't know how to solve it.
I have Dolores on another line. Let's see if you can hear her if she talks. Try it, Dolores.
Hello.
Hi, Dolores. Sorry for all the confusion on the audio.
sorry. I could not dial in as planned, as you know, and I know it's not within your control. So I wanted to say a couple of things, if I could.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I echo everything that Michelle and Donna have said. Our subcommittee has been in the process of gathering information about how people have experienced the system over the past 6 months. And we're gathering questions and concerns and suggestions that we hope will inform OPWDD's preparation for another wave. So I can share a couple of those if time permits, but we are not through, we're not finished. We're just in the process of gathering that info.
Dolores, since we happen to be able to actually hear you right now, would you like to share those thoughts at this point, just in the event that we're not able to hear you subsequently?
Sure. I'll just point out a couple of things. So one concern is, you know, in general, there's a significant uptick in substance abuse, depression, anxiety, domestic and child abuse due to COVID, social unrest, unemployment, and food insecurity. We're concerned the care managers, VSCs, and other staff may not have the tools and the resources they need to recognize the signs and symptoms of people they support, provide opportunities to talk about those issues, and have the difficult conversations.
Thank you.
So that's one. And of course, similarly, we're concerned that some providers may not have the tools that they need to address the same stressors impacting their workforce.
Gotcha.
The second thing is many folks that we support who are employed are essential workers. So who or what service has the responsibility to watch out for their health and safety, ensuring that their employer is providing them with adequate protections and helping them understand precautions to take when they return home? Is it ISS, SEMP, ComHab, care management? There seems to be some confusion over who's responsible.
I'm not sure that I understand what that issue was. I'm sorry.
Okay, so many of the people we support are employed as essential workers, working in supermarkets and places like that.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
Who has the responsibility to watch out for their health and safety? What service is it? ISS, SEMP, ComHab, care management? There's confusion out there about who should be taking the lead.
I think that's a good question. I mean, I would think that individuals, who are employed and receive a support in that employment, that would be a primary service that would be assistive to them. I don't know, Abiba, if you have a view on that.
Yeah, Roger, I'm not entirely sure I heard the question, but I think that the question was asking who should take the lead as it relates to health and safety needs for individuals who are employed and working. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is the question, Abiba.
Okay, so I know that for certain individuals who have resumed work, the care manager has worked with the employer to complete an assessment that would really sort of outline expectations on the job to ensure that there's safety practices in place for the individual, whether that's wearing a mask, taking breaks to make sure that people wash their hands, making sure that the individual while working is able to maintain social distancing, et cetera. So if the person is receiving supports on the job by a job coach, or if, a HAB worker is sort of involved to assist that person, then certainly if there are health and safety concerns, that individual would be primary and would make sure that they're communicating directly with the employer, and then to the extent needed, communicate to the care manager so that there can be additional follow-up to make sure that the safety issues and concerns are addressed.
Thank you, Abiba.
I just want to point out that there's confusion in the field about that.
So why don't we take that back and see if there's a way we can help alleviate that confusion through some, appropriate communications mechanism.
Okay.
All right, if Dolores, so I'm looking, just trying to find whether there are any other raised hands. Margaret, Mary, and Dolores all have raised hands, but I think those remain raised from prior comment. I'll just give 3 beats to see whether that's a new raised hand or an existing raised hand. Okie dokie. So,
issue though on process.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'd like to get clarification on process. Since our subcommittee is gathering this information, we'd like to send it to the DDAC to take a look at and then move it forward to OPW, but we don't want to wait till the next quarterly meeting.
Yeah, we can certainly work to expedite that with, with Michelle and Nick as respectively vice chair and chair. Certainly, we are, there are multiple kind of initiatives happening right now, and I'll attempt to segue into the third item on the agenda, which is our waiver amendment. And there's 2 components to that. One is that we have some actions that we're contemplating to be effective 10/1, October 1 of 2020. In addition, and so we can talk a little bit about that. And in addition, we have been engaging through a multiplicity of forums our stakeholders in seeking to understand the emergency amendments that were made through the Appendix K. So those were made in early March with an initial expiration date of early September. We then extended that with a discussion with CMS, the federal partner, to the, I believe, the end of March. But under the terms of that emergency waiver, that Appendix K, we would be able to potentially look at making some of those flexibilities a permanent feature of our waiver. So that's a process where if we were to make those decisions, that we would need to be seeking that authority sometime in October. So it is a process that we have engaged in with a variety of stakeholders, and we wanted to bring to the Ddac that both elements, and this does fit into also part of the discussion around the Ddac recommendations, but we first wanted to make sure that there was an understanding of where we're at on each of those 2 things. So for the first piece, which is the 10/1 waiver actions, I believe we have Kate Marley queued up. Hi, Kate, to be able to discuss that. And then in terms of the stakeholder process that we've been doing in order to kind of understand what of the Appendix K should be extended into the permanent waiver, I believe Allison McCarthy, you were going to speak to that. So let me hope that our technology is working and Kate Marley is available to speak to the first point. Kate?
Hi, everybody. Am I hearable?
You are, Kate. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So I think folks are certainly well aware of the amendment 10 for October 1st. It is now in front of CMS for final review. So we're anticipating that will occur prior to October 1st, which is our anticipated effective date of that action. So this amendment was really driven by the budget process and the need to create savings. And I think just writ large, the approach that was taken, and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, was to look at the necessary savings and to avoid taking system-wide across-the-board cuts with the hope that we were really minimizing the effect on direct care staffing reimbursement. So that was sort of the overall strategy that was taken in terms of looking at the savings actions that would be taken via this waiver. So the actions that are included are really focused on, from a savings perspective, supervised residential habilitation, And the first element that is included is a setting of the occupancy factor to 0. So the occupancy factor is part of the rate setting build that looked at the historical, what they called true vacancies for a provider. So a true vacancy was not a temporary absence from the home, but rather a bed that is not filled if someone, for example, moved and there was a period of time before the next person moved in. That period of time would be considered a true vacancy. So the occupancy factor up until October 1 looked at that historical data and then inflated the rate a little bit to offset what would be anticipated to happen in terms of vacancies going forward. So that is set to 0. It was limited to a fairly small percentage. So while that is certainly an impact on providers, and I don't mean to minimize it, in and of itself, it wasn't, it probably wasn't the largest factor that we are addressing here. The other portion of actions that were taken were to address days when the person was not in the residence. And there's 2 types of days when a person is not in the residence. And the first one is called a retainer day, and that's paid to an agency when a person is, for example, in a hospital or a nursing home, and it is limited already and will continue to be limited to 14 days times the certified capacity. So we still have flexibility. Somebody might use none in a year. Another person might have more than 14 days. The provider has that resource to sort of spread amongst its residents as needed. The change that we are making effective 10/1 is that the reimbursement rate for those days will not be 100% of the rate. It will be 50% of the rate. The other type of change that we're making to the rate setting structure is around therapeutic leave days. Therapeutic leave days were, prior to this, unlimited and were reimbursed at 100% of the provider's rate. Effective 10/1, the change is that it will be reimbursed at 50% of the provider's rate, and there is a per person cap of 96 days a year, which really sort of returns, it's a similar math to when we had a monthly unit of service and there was a certain number of days that were required to build that month. We essentially sort of went back to that same therapeutic leave day analysis or calculation when we had the monthly unit of service. In addition to, so those are the sort of the major actions in this 10/1 amendment. There were some other what I would call minor administrative changes. We eliminated some of the signatures required on the documentation of choices form. It's still, of course, required as part of the waiver enrollment process, and it has to be signed by the individual and family. So it was really just a bit of administrative streamlining. We did include clarifying language in the waiver around the start of a more formal process and more consistent process across the DDROs for evaluating the need for, or the decision-making around looking at authorization for new folks coming into community rehabilitation. So that was included in the waiver, and that work will be proceeding over the course of 2021. Other than that, I think that's pretty much the highlight for the 10/1 changes. Again, you know, it's terribly difficult times and nobody at all enjoys these kinds of changes. But I think our strategy was, to the best of our ability, to try to limit it from a broad spread impact on our service system, understanding that, you know, it's just a really difficult time financially for the state, and obviously, as we've just heard quite eloquently, you know, for everyone in our service system, it's certainly been a challenging year. So that's kind of where we are at in terms of our baseline. So I can take questions as long as people are understanding that I am not a rate setter. But I can answer questions as a non-rate setter.
Let me do my best, Kate. So folks, there are a number of comments that are coming in the chat box. What we're going to try to do is grab those, put those in, and then have sort of a readout of public comment, and to the degree to which there are questions, we'll pivot back to items on the agenda. There's too much flowing in the chat box to be able to meaningfully read it out one at a time. So that's what we're going to try to do. So I'm going to first ask for members of the Ddac committee if you have questions, and I'm still seeing some hands raised, but I don't know if they're ghosts from prior hand raisings or whether they are new. So let me take a pause and see if there are members of the committee that would like to ask questions, share comment with respect to the briefing that Kate Marley just gave. So it sounds like there are not.
No, Roger, Margaret.
Okay. Hi, Margaret.
Mine's a new one. Yeah. These particular 10-1 cuts come on top of the huge outlay of expenses for PPA, for hazard pay, and many other things, extra staff in hospitals and so on, that providers have had to pay with no support whatever from OPW or the state, no fiscal support. And it just appears that there have to be other ways to realize the same degree of savings. And I think OPW would have benefited from advice from the provider community, especially on ways that would have been less harmful to take some of these cuts and realize savings. The damage is going to be really great. I hate to say that, but it's clear.
Thank you, Margaret. Are there other comments that members of the committee want to offer at this point?
Roger, can you hear me?
We can.
It's Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Okay. I have a number of issues that families are facing, particularly regarding self-direction. And also, I sent a message earlier, I don't know if it went through, but we heard that certain CCOs have made dramatic layoffs or cut down on hiring. And so a lot of families are without case managers right now for their CCOs, or their case has been sent on to other case managers who are seemingly pretty overwhelmed. And I wonder if you could, number one, give us some update on what is going on with the CCOs as far as layoffs of staff is concerned. And secondly, regarding self-direction, are our budgets being left intact, or are they subject to this 20% cut? Because these are monies that are already being put aside. And a lot of the families have not been able to access a lot of their budget because obviously gyms and certain community activities are no longer possible. So we would just like to have an update on what is going on regarding self-direction budgets and also the CCO issue.
So on the CCO issue, I'm aware, I believe that there is one care management organization that has undertaken some restructuring. I don't have the particular details. Allison, I don't know, McCarthy, are you on the line? I know that we've engaged with that CCO, and just out of kind of a process perspective, I think it's best not to necessarily get into too many of the details, but I know that we've engaged that CCO to make sure that whatever restructurings that they are undertaking do not impact care management services. And I believe that conversation is ongoing in terms of assuring ourselves that the families and individuals will not be negatively impacted. Allison, if you're both on and unmuted, is that a fair summary of where we're at with respect to that question?
Yes, can you hear me, Roger?
We can, thank you.
Sure. So yes, that's the case, Roger. We have engaged with the CCO who has undergone some restructuring. They are doing this in a quite rapid pace so that the transition can occur quickly and there can be minimum disruption. In the restructure, they have maintained all current care managers, and they're actually adding additional care managers to the workforce. So there are instances where people were laid off. They're in some instances being rehired to an appropriate role, and in some cases to the care management role. So we are continuing that dialogue and understanding with the CCO and working to ensure that their communication is flowing to providers, regional office, and families and individuals. And they've assured us that they've reached out to all individuals who are enrolled in their CCO. And we continue to dialogue to follow up and confirm the completion of that transition. And the goal is, again, they've assured us to not impact families and individuals directly, but they've also offered communication methods if in fact there is a concern. So that's where we're at with that.
Thank you, Allison. And in terms of Mary, I think what you were speaking about with respect to is the 20% withhold, which has been imposed with respect to state-only funds. And so that is something that has been implemented as part of the state's cash management strategy, given the extraordinary financial situation that the state has experiencing and the lack of support, federal support for addressing that. So I believe the application of that, and I'm just looking in our panelists whether we have one of our fiscal team there. I'm not seeing it right now, but the application is to those funds that do not have a federal match, and so within the self-direction model, there are certain funds that do not have that federal match, and therefore there's been a withhold of 20% imposed upon those payments.
State funds.
That's correct, with a couple of exemptions. Most importantly, I think for a lot of folks, is we were able to exempt the ISS, the housing, the housing subsidies.
Rent subsidies.
Rent subsidies, thank you. That from the withhold, but other types of state-only funds have been subject to that withhold, once again as a consequence of the state's fiscal situation and the lack of federal support to support us.
Mary, this is Michelle. Can you just clarify? Because I think I heard another aspect of your question about the self-directed budgets. You were mentioning how in some cases the budgets just cannot be used because some of those things that would have been under the IDGS services, they're just not operational. And I kind of heard in your question a concern about whether that was going to impact future budgets, that, you know, the current year budget is underspent. I might have misinterpreted you, but that's what I thought I heard.
No, but Michelle, you're correct. I mean, there's a lot of our budgets currently cannot be accessed because of COVID restrictions. So obviously that money is not being used. So if the 20% is taken out of that, or it just comes out of the overall state-funded parts of the budget, can it be applied to the, not individually to each item, but to the items that we can't use? Well, we can't use them, so the money is not being used anyway at present. Although no, with some of the restrictions being taken off now, that will change.
Right. So, so I did see in the chat room a request for clarification. Yes, the 20% withhold has not been applied to the rent subsidy. So that's a question that was posed. Just to clarify the comment I made previously, in terms of with the question you're asking, Mary, no, the withhold is being applied to categories of payment. So it depends upon what the nature of the payment is. I just want to check, is Kevin on or Christine Carey? It looks like not. I just want to make sure that I'm not misstating anything. But that is, my understanding is that we would be, it's applied to categories of spending.
You know, Roger, how long the exemption for rent subsidies will continue? Because this has caused great anxiety amongst families, and particularly if it, not knowing from month to month, the rent becomes due and landlords are not interested in what the state is doing, but families really need to have some guidance on, will this continue through the end of the year, for example, or until further notice? Is there any guidance on that?
No, I absolutely. We've heard from a lot of folks that some guidance would be very, very helpful, and we're working to be able to provide that. As folks may know, the fiscal, I guess it's the second quarter of fiscal will expire September 30th. So we would anticipate being able to provide additional guidance in anticipation of the third quarter. We just don't have that formal guidance yet, and I do respect what you're saying, Mary, that being able to provide that guidance is very important, and we absolutely understand that. So we're working to be able to achieve that.
As soon as you know, Roger, can you let me know? So at least the families that I have contact with and some of the different parent groups around the state, we can let them know, because we can get the word out quickly.
Yeah, no, as soon as we have that information, we will certainly broadcast it far and wide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anything anything that we can do? Anything on the panel? Any members of the committee that are trying to get a voice in? I'm hearing some background, but I think that's just background noise. So let us then proceed to Allison, I believe, was going to help give some brief out on the stakeholder process that we've been engaged in over the last 6 weeks or so, and to try to understand, as I said, what of the Appendix K crisis flexibilities ought to be extended as part of the permanent waiver. So that's a process that I think, Allison, you were going to help give some information about.
Sure, thanks, Roger. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, a little bit of background noise, but we can hear you.
Great. So as Roger mentioned, we have been engaging stakeholders in a series of ways in the last several weeks. The purpose, again, is to really inform the future of federal agreements in support of delivery of our post-COVID day service delivery. We really are also looking to understand what's happening out there. So to address some of the questions that Michelle noted, we're looking to send a survey to providers that identifies, who's actually receiving day services, what programs, how many programs are open, how many programs are not open, and if an individual is receiving virtual services or not receiving virtual services, or in the residence receiving community hab R, or perhaps already in a site-based program. So we're trying to get a good look to understand what's happening out there. So I think that helps address some of the concerns, Michelle, you may have raised. We have a multi-pronged approach. We began with regional focus group discussions, and then we also convened a series of individual stakeholder groups that were led by our commissioner. And then we received several written comments and input from stakeholders that I'll touch on. So the 5 regional focus groups were held between August 19th and 21st. They were hosted by our regional offices, and a small group of local representatives and individuals and families were invited. And the discussions were facilitated by an independent entity, the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. So they were able to collect and gather information. They're currently refining those documents that are in draft, and then they'll be shared back with OPWD. OPWD is discussing how best to share back information with our stakeholders. The focus was really the experience of individuals and families during the emergency shutdown of day services and the experience as day services reopened. So we really received a lot of positive feedback from participants in just the opportunity to be heard and for OPWD to listen. Much input was received around prepared discussion questions related to what worked well during the emergency and what didn't work. And how do we take that experience, the experience of reopening, and inform future recommendations for our Appendix K. Stakeholders also requested more opportunities for discussions like the focus group discussions that occurred. So in addition to the focus group discussions, we had, again, the commissioner was able to meet separately with several stakeholder groups from August 31st through September 9th. The groups included 9 Annie's, Ddac, Grow, New York City Fair. So I think, it was a much needed discussion, and we were able to gain a lot of input. We're talking internally about how best to consolidate the input from both those meetings and the focus group discussions to then inform our future amendment that Kate spoke to earlier. So what did we hear? We heard that communication was critical, and determining and depending on if individuals and families were hearing from providers, hearing from OPWD, hearing from CCOs, really dictated, whether they were able to, experience with some information what was happening and feel comfortable about any new next steps or about the reopening. But if information wasn't getting to individuals and families, it was difficult. It was a scary time. And so I think we learned clearly that communication flowing down from OPWD to providers to CCOs, and that consistent and early communication is key. So that was a theme, a takeaway that OPWD has heard and is taking seriously. It was also very clear that people's perspective and desire to return to services was dependent on the individual and family. Some really wanted to get back to services, and others still felt it was too early and that they weren't comfortable returning to services. Provider outreach, provider reopening, it was also very varying. Some providers got out of the gate quickly and were able to open doors and reach out to individuals and families, and others may still be planning their reopening and submitting their safety plan, as Aviva mentioned earlier. Another key theme was telehealth and remote services. Some were able to take advantage and experience the use of technology very effectively, and others may have not had access to technology or may have not had the internet connection, while others were able to. And in other cases, individuals may have not been able to use technology due to their disability and it just not being a good fit. So a varying level of experiences from a telehealth remote service delivery perspective. One of the other key findings that we heard was that those who live at home experienced a more significant drop off of support, leaving caregivers to meet the needs, which was reiterated this morning or earlier in today's conversation. Clearly, if you're a family at home, you took on the role and responsibility of caring for your loved one, and it was very difficult to be served in some cases. We also heard more recently through the discussions with the commissioner that people want care management to return to face-to-face, and they're looking forward to that, and CCOs are expected to begin and engage individuals and families on a face-to-face basis as appropriate. Transportation, a key theme that we heard and a key challenge that, I think we all have heard and discussed previous, but with COVID and the risks of health and safety becoming more of a challenge for our system. And lastly, just want to mention, which was also mentioned earlier, the concern for serious crisis in mental health impacting people who are isolated and stressed and not able to have a regular routine and missing their connection with communities. So I think those are some of the key themes and takeaways from the focus group discussions that I thought were worth noting. But again, OPWD is working internally to bring all of this information together and use it to inform our next appendix or our next amendment, which will integrate some of those Appendix K flexibilities that you're aware of. So lastly, just wanted to touch on the day program survey. Again, we're looking to understand what's happening out there today, who's being served, how many people are being served, how many programs are open or not open. We are disseminating those surveys to our providers, and then we'll be collecting that back. We're going to ask our provider associations to encourage participation from the providers and support their members in completing that survey as needed. Again, we're really looking to inform input around COVID flexibilities and which have been most important, and what do we want to carry forward into that next waiver amendment. So we'll continue to engage in that survey process and probably close that up early October to then inform the timeline for the waiver amendment following the 10-1 amendment that's we hope is about to be approved. So I think that's about it. Happy to take any questions should there be any.
Thanks so much, Allison. And I think it's important to emphasize that the destination here is an understanding of what we want to continue. I've had the opportunity to read through the chat box comments. The current, in response to one of the questions, the current Appendix K expires at the end of March. So to avail ourselves of the flexibilities beyond the end of March 2021 would require further amendment of the permanent waiver, and that this process is intended to inform that. So with that, I'd like to ask whether any members of the committee questions or comments. we will get to the part of the agenda where we're talking the Ddac recommendations, and I know the Services Subcommittee, and hopefully we can benefit from audio with Dolores to be able to talk that through, because certainly that's going to help inform part of our thoughts and judgment there. But let me just pause there and see if there's any comments or questions that people may have with respect to what Allison has just shared.
This is Michelle. Allison, thank you. That was very helpful. I appreciate hearing that really detailed breakout of the types of things that you heard in the focus group, and be interesting to hear and see what the responses of the survey are that you're doing of the providers. Just two things that I've been thinking about a little bit. One is, I think it's great that you guys did those focus groups and, went right directly to people being served to get feedback from folks. It's kind of a, I don't, my experience is many times you do that, through other entities, you kind of were talking directly to folks. I think it's a great model and something, we should be thinking about doing some more. You may want to consider doing a, post focus group kind of satisfaction survey of the people who attended to see what their thoughts were on how the meetings went, and if they had any, things that were particularly positive or things that they thought could be better, because that could inform, doing that type of thing in the future. What I've heard of those meetings, I didn't participate in any of them, but it does sound like a conversation started happening, which is great, because sometimes when state agencies do those types of things, it's very heavily presentation focused and you don't actually hear back from people. So I think that's good, that happened. But it would be great to just hear from the people who did participate to see if there's any feedback they have on just how it was facilitated and, the questions and the process. Just for looking to be able to continue doing it in the future would be great. Then the second comment I have has nothing really to do directly with Allison's, with what Allison's work is, but the fact that we need to do a provider survey to find out who's being served is problematic. And I know we know that. We were talking kind of since Commissioner Kastner came on board about data capacity and how much information actually exists, at the statewide OPWDD level about who's getting what services and when. And, given, the magnitude of the budget crisis we're in, it just really points to, how do you manage a budget when you're not even really able to tell us how many people are getting day half services right now? And so I think we have to continue, and I know you're working on those data connections and that ability to have more real-time information about that. But this is just really exposing, what a huge Achilles heel it is that we don't have access to that type of information, in the real time. And if there's any ability of getting any special funding or, things to kind of continue pushing that project along, I do think it's critical.
Can you hear me?
I have to take myself up. Kira, I just sent you a side note. If we can just hold for a second on what you're going to comment on, just to allow anybody who else wants to think through on the stakeholder process, and then we're going to pivot back to where you are. Okay.
Okay.
Anything more on terms of the stakeholder process, and I appreciate the point that that you made, Michelle, in terms of both understanding whether that engagement wasn't as effective as we thought it was through some sort of post survey kind of activity. I just want to, there's a note in the chat box about the surveys and whether they'd be available in other languages. These are surveys that we are reaching out directly to the providers themselves, not service recipients. So I believe that this survey is going to be one that is just is in English because it's going to the regulated providers, not directly to individuals or families. So any more comments on the stakeholder process? And then I want to pivot back, which is, I think, an item on the COVID-19 update. And then I do want to make sure that I address a couple of things that I was able to read through the chat room for comment and give some feedback there. So let me go to you, Gary, which is really a COVID-19 comment. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. It's a little bit of both. So I was just wondering if there's been any feedback related to accessibility of dental services. Of course, everybody's had a decreased accessibility during COVID and even up till now due to capacity issues. And whether we're hearing, what's the update on the Article 16 clinics? And following up with that, we know that some of the locations, such as Helen Hayes, are closed down, some of their programs, and really reduced capacity. So if there's feedback coming, what could we do to help improve that if possible, and just hear what's going on? We ran a task force meeting of dentists from around the state to get their impression of things, but impression from this group would be very helpful.
Well, thanks very much, Gary. I don't believe that was a specific focus of the outreach that we engaged in. Jill, I can see you're on the line and muted. I don't know if you have information or whether you want to kind of take that offline in terms of, I know that many of our, if not most of the Article 16 clinics continue to operate even through the pandemic with the understandable restrictions that were imposed. But I don't know if you have any further information in response to Gary's question or whether that's something that we should look into.
I don't have anything on further. I wasn't, Gary, if I knew you wanted to have some of that information in more detail, I would have done some reconnaissance on that point, and I can certainly follow up to do that, and perhaps you and I can have a quick call to follow up from the results of the meeting that you had with the dental task force recently. So that will give me some focus areas to look at. But again, we had and continue to have some, clinic services happening, but I think the capacity and catching up from the backlog of delays that we had continues to be an issue in just broadly for everybody, certainly including those served in our clinics.
Yeah, that's to be we'll talk about that later. That'd be great. That's to be expected. Our concern, of course, is some of the clinics that were running marginally, not so much even the Article 16s, but the other clinics that treat people that were marginal to begin with financially are now kind of devastated and may not be able to come back. So this is a topic for future discussion, or in certain cases, if it's acute, then maybe in a more rapid discussion. So thank you.
Thank you.
So a couple of items, just I'm trying to keep abreast of the chat room while also moving the meeting agenda forward. First of all, there were several questions regarding the 10-1 rate actions and potential impact on the self-direction program. So nothing in the 10-1 actions that Kate Marley described impact the self-direction program. There's a separate issue, which is the 20% withhold, which is what Mary Somoza, who's one of the committee members, brought up. But that's unrelated to the rate actions, which address occupancy factor and other related payments for vacant opportunities. And those are obviously not relevant to the self-directed model. There was a question in the chat room around due process, and there was a recent memo within the last week or two that was issued. It was a reminder memo. It's one that has issued every year or two, I believe, and it was a reminder to providers that if they would believe they cannot serve an individual that they have to follow the appropriate processes under 633.12 of our regulations, which include notice and an opportunity to contest the discharge decision. So that's something that is germane to any of our service systems. And then I think that there were a couple of questions around safety protocols when it comes to both day programming and community habilitation. And on those questions, I guess I would refer the questioners to, there is, if you go to the OPWDD website, there is a thing you can click on, which will take you to all of the COVID-19 guidance documents, including the kinds of precautions that must be undertaken in various program types. So rather than spending a lot of time there, I would recommend that resource. And I saw that Josie also put into the chat room how you can sign up for updates from OPWDD through our listserv for folks who may be participating in this and would like to be able to continue to be informed about information that we may be sharing. I would like then maybe just to see if there's any more comments on presentations that either Kate or Allison offered before we pivot over to the last item on our agenda. So let me just give a couple of beats to ask whether there are any more comments from the committee members.
Hi, sorry, it's Michelle again. I'm always going to jump in when you give me a chance there. The COVID update, there is one more thing that I wanted to bring up that I hadn't earlier. And it goes to accessibility for all families in New York State. We've talked about it a couple times, but the guidance documents, the summaries of what's happening, here's what's open and not open, here's what you should expect in terms of a safety plan. We really need to be getting those from OPWDD translated into, the top languages that are spoken in New York State so that all families have access to that information. It's critical for keeping their loved ones safe, for understanding what's going on. And it doesn't always happen in a really, sometimes it occurs, but it often doesn't occur kind of in a timely fashion. Those families should be able to get information at the same time other people are. We're serving a very large group of Spanish-speaking immigrant families. They need to know what's happening with their kids' services as well. And also the issue of accessibility for the deaf community to any of the, the public, meetings and things that are going on. There are people that do need that, the sign language interpretation in order to be able to participate and know what's happening, on equal footing with others. And we're hearing that more and more and more from the people that we're serving. People are really kind of clamoring for, what is just a justice issue of making sure that they have equal access.
No, absolutely appreciate it and absolutely vital, Michelle. I know that in addition to what you shared, we certainly have feedback from the self-advocacy community that there needed to be and needs to be more timely plain language materials, right? So to the degree to which we're issuing guidance documents that are in language that may not be fully accessible for individuals. That we've done some work on that, but we can improve. And I think that was one of the key takeaways as well from the stakeholder engagement that we undertook. That communication is key. There was a lot of communication, but we could be more effective. So I think we'll look very closely in this moment that we have right now, where fortunately, we have a low level of a virus and infection, that to avail ourselves of those opportunities to improve in that area. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'm going to try to move on to the fourth agenda item. And so what we had for those of you who attended virtually the last Ddac meeting, there were several subcommittees of the Ddac that had been established by the Ddac to look into specific issues. They developed and submitted recommendations to OPWDD. We are developing a formal written response to each committee's, and then in last quarter's meeting, the Ddac, adopted those recommendations as recommendations of the Ddac. We are developing formal written responses, which we anticipate having shortly to the members of the Ddac. We wanted in this part of the agenda to give our sort of our current thoughts on those recommendations, and out of that discussion that I hope will ensue, we can certainly finalize our written responses. Nick and/or Michelle, does that make sense to you as a way of proceeding? And I don't know whether you want to summarize, have each committee head summarize briefly their recommendations, or whether you would like us to go immediately into the response component of it.
Roger, I think, and Michelle, please chime in here. I think that given the technical issues, we may not be able to have everybody summarize. So I think maybe, if in the response you can kind of be aware of that, or whoever's responding could kind of maybe just be a little bit more elaborate in their response. I think it would help inform the people who were not at the last meeting and avoid the technical issues of having 3 different subcommittees to try to chime back in. Totally fair. I just didn't, I don't like to give somebody else's opinions, but we can certainly strive to do that and, accomplish the objective. So there were three subcommittees, one on the front door, a second on residential, and a third on medical, if I'm not mistaken. Those are the 3 subcommittee reports we received. Nick, is that consistent with your listing? Yes. We have 3 subcommittees, and the system subcommittee presented a series of recommendations that included the front door. The residential services subcommittee presented a number of recommendations that had been made in last year, and then were reissued this year. And then also we had the healthcare subcommittee under Gary Goldstein that also presented some recommendations. Wonderful. So let's start, if you don't mind, with the front door recommendations. The front door obviously being the branding, if you will, for how one would access services through the regional office. I was hoping to pivot to Abiba Kindo, who is our Deputy Commissioner for Regional Offices, for sort of a top-level overview of our reactions, and then we can maybe dig into whatever specifics make sense in anticipation of a more formal point-by-point response, which we would be sending shortly to you.
Great, thank you, Roger. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. So I just wanted to highlight for folks the front door recommendations that were put forward, just so that we're all on the same page. Overall, there were recommendations regarding, a document outlining the process for families. There were recommendations that we make specific content changes to the slides that are used in the front door information session to clarify and simplify the information for families. There were also recommendations about making sure that we include language that provides folks with an understanding of the eligibility appeals process, and that we provide online sessions, and that there be training for our facilitators and a tracking process to ensure that as people move through the front door process, that no one sort of slips through the cracks. And so we've been doing a significant amount of work internally on the front door process, not only as a result of these recommendations, but just because we have a process where we issue surveys to families at the conclusion of the front door process, and certainly take that feedback and look to incorporate that in any process improvements within the front door process. So I just want to speak very quickly to the recommendations that I had outlined. As it relates to a document outlining the process, we have created a 2-page welcome document that outlines and defines key steps. That document is certainly sent to individuals and families, and also includes materials regarding the information session so that families can be informed. In terms of the tracking process, the front door has an electronic tracking tool that tracks the progress of an individual as they move throughout the front door process. Our staff can check at any time where an individual is in the process, and our front door staff usually will make and are required to make 3 attempts to contact someone if that individual has lost contact with the front door. So there is a mechanism to track folks as they move through that process. In terms of the appeal rights regarding eligibility, individuals do receive this information when they receive the approval or denial of eligibility through a notice of decision. So that certainly is available for folks, and we want to make sure that people understand their rights as it relates to that. In terms of the online presentation, I think that folks know, especially, in light of COVID, we've certainly provided our front door information sessions via WebEx. We will be continuing this approach and certainly are looking at developing modules that people can access on specific topics like eligibility, Medicaid, CCOs, and services for children. So I'm going to stop there and see if people have a reaction to the information that I shared. I know that there are some other recommendations that we certainly have addressed through process improvements that we will share in writing with folks.
Thanks very much, Biba. Let me ask the committee members, in particular those who led this process, to give any feedback they have, and certainly will, as I noted, we wanted to use this opportunity of the engagement to the degree to which we're misunderstanding or not responding, to know that before we provide the writing that we would follow with. So let me just pause.
Roger, I'm getting Dolores on for you. Here she is.
Very, very appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, I want to thank you. You hit on each of the opening recommendations so far, and thank you for your response. I think it sounds like there's going to be some significant improvement.
I should definitely have no more comments after that very positive comment, but any other comments on that particular topic? Okay, so the next component, and I'm just toggling between things, would be the residential recommendations. And once again, let me give an opportunity. I don't know if John Maltby, who's the chair of that subcommittee, wants to give a top line summary, or whether we would just prefer some response there.
Hi, Roger and everyone. I'd say that we've gone over it pretty frequently and in fairly extensive detail. So if there are any clarification would be helpful.
Absolutely. So a couple of things, we're working on, and in large part, I think what drives the Housing Committee subcommittee recommendation is trying to, in a way, re-understand the relationship between OPW supports and the type of housing supports we provide. rough numbers, I believe we spend about $8 billion annually, and about 5.3 billion of it is spent on the certified residential. And increasingly we are seeing the demand for additional residential supports and a challenge in meeting that need. So I think what the housing subcommittee is pointing to is a couple of things. One is making the rental subsidy more attractive as an option, as well as the supports that surround that. I would like to say that that I have a definitive response to that. We understand the recommendation at this point. It's fitting within our budget making discussion as to what can be recommended and afforded as part of the budget discussion that is happening presently in anticipation of the fiscal 21-22 budget. Our intention is to try to make the what's typically referred to as non-certified housing an attractive option, both because it is more community integrated as well as more cost effective from a state budget perspective. But I don't want to overcommit at this moment, since the budget making has not fully completed yet, but it's something that we take very, very seriously as we're approaching that decision making. In terms of a larger strategy, one of the things that we are looking at as part of a stakeholder strategy beginning in sort of mid-October to late October, we really do want to engage our stakeholders around the residential supports in particular, thinking about what are the alternatives, and trying to effectuate some of the culture change that I think that the residential subcommittee was pointing to. But once again, this is in turn quite dependent, I think, as the analysis provides, on what we're able to do within the budgeting process. So I think that's where we are right there, right now. The third component, which is related, is on the self-direction model. We've been engaging some of our self-direction stakeholders around that continuum of care and the support that can be done. Right now, the question we have is whether we might want to explore some enhancements to the self-direction model as part of the middle October, late October waiver amendment, or whether that's something that would really need to potentially wait till the following one. And once again, that has a fiscal component to it as well. On housing navigation as a waiver service, one of the questions that I think we wanted to discuss a little bit with the committee is, within the current self-direction model, there does seem to be something similar to a housing navigation, though not called such, that could be used, and we're trying to see whether there is space to promote that as one of the allowable services. Certainly wouldn't be applicable to those who are not beneficiaries of the self-direction model, but I think we have nearly 20,000 enrollees in the self-direction model at this point. So we would be a place where we could make some substantial progress. And so I was curious, John, or others who are part of the residential subcommittee, as to whether that's an effective avenue of attack, if you will, or whether that's something that you think for one reason or another is not a productive line of inquiry.
So my view on that would be, if we were able to use IDGS and to engage a housing navigator as a skilled person to provide somebody with the ability to move into a more community-based setting or to fulfill their desire for more independence, I think that would accomplish what we've been seeking to accomplish. We do have in OPWDD's house a full proposal that was prepared, I'm guessing about beginning at 2.5 years ago, to create housing navigation as a waiver service, but the language in that would certainly be adaptable to fulfill the requirements of IDGS. And if we could do that, I think that it would achieve the objective that we're trying to achieve without necessarily having to amend the waiver.
Yeah, and that's obviously the the simpler solution is often the one that is to be preferred when trying to do something of this nature. So I'm pleased that would be potentially responsive, obviously, to what you're saying. I tried to cover. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to insert one thing is that as we look at trying to offer people who may have currently housing through certified services, that usually those individuals don't have self-direction plans, and you may want to have housing navigators work with them to look at alternatives if they are interested in pursuing those. So we may want to look at a workaround for that population who may not have access to self-direction if you want to make this service available. Just a thought.
Right. I mean, that's a really terrific point, Nick, because currently, as part of a DDPC funded grant, we're working to help about 40 people move from either their family home or an existing certified setting into the community. And the people with the biggest challenge are coming from supervised IRAs. But they are also the ones who will achieve the highest cost savings if they are successful. And it takes time, but without the services of a housing navigator, it's not going to happen. And so,
absolutely.
Any way to make that happen would be a positive.
Okay. So the last of the 3 subcommittee recommendations had to do with the medical, I think it's called the Medical Subcommittee. And once again, I don't know I think Gary Goldstein was the chair of that subcommittee, and I don't know if he wanted to give a 30-second overview of those recommendations, just giving that opportunity, Gary.
You can summarize. I'll summarize it. One was that there is a gap in end-of-life care wishes being fulfilled, especially for weekends, and there was a hope that that could be investigated and fixed. That was kind of a low-hanging fruit type of item. And a lot of the other items are related to medical needs, but necessary to achieve was a request to develop a medical task force similar to what we did on the dental side. And if that could be supported, they would address issues that were identified, such as choking, preventing emergency room visits, polypharmacies, improving training in medical school, etc.
Right. So the first issue, I think, relates to the availability of off-hours attorneys. And I know that we've had some engagement with the Mental Hygiene Legal Service, which is an independent agency, independent of OPWDD. I see, Willow, you've unmuted yourself, and I think you could report out on what we've been able to achieve on that side.
Yep, I sure can. And I think it's more complicated than just the MHLSPs. So at the height of the pandemic in the sort of late winter, early spring, in response to what was, an unfortunate uptick in individuals' hospitalizations and end-of-life questions, we took 3 actions that I think are relevant to the after-hours completion of the MOLST checklist, which is the legal requirement we're talking about for individuals who lack the capacity to make healthcare decisions and don't have a healthcare proxy. So the 3 actions that we took around the same time, we established a 24-hour hotline to help ensure that the requirements regarding the completion of the MOLST checklist were met. So specifically what that means is we have essentially licensed psychologists that we made available via the hotline to provide the concurring opinion that's required. That's the piece that essentially confirms that an individual lacks the capacity to make healthcare decisions. And two people are required to make that, and there are certain levels of expertise that they're required to have, and not all healthcare providers or hospitals have clinicians sitting around that meet that criteria. So we wanted to make sure, as people reached an end-of-life status in an inconvenient time, and I don't mean to make light of that, but we know that people reach that point on off hours, evenings, and weekends. We wanted to make sure that resource was available. So we created a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week hotline that people could utilize for that purpose. It's still active, but really should be used as a very last resort. The other thing we did around that time is we worked with Mental Hygiene Legal Services, as Roger mentioned. They also play a role in the most end-of-life process. So we wanted to make sure that they were also available on off hours because we could make clinicians available, but if MHLS is unavailable, it's not particularly helpful. And we knew that historically there had been some geographic inequity in terms of being able to find an attorney to return a call after hours from MHLS. So we worked with them to make sure that they were also available across the state. And third, but maybe less important, we also set up an informational page on our website for healthcare decisions. So there's additional guidance about the completion of the MOLST checklist for individuals with disabilities. And that is up on our website for people to find more easily when you need it. So those were the 3 things we did in response.
And I think our intention would be to try to maintain those functionalities going forward. Is that right, Willow?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think that's going to address some of the concerns of the physicians that deal with this, and we will report that to them, and perhaps we'll have you speak to them too also at some point necessary. So thank you.
That's great. And in terms of a medical task force, I think that, one of the things that we're going to need to evaluate, Gary, and I think maybe that it might be useful to have a sidebar, fully understand the intention of it, but wanting to make sure that our resources in terms of staff resources are used most effectively. There are, multiple demands, and particularly on those who have medical expertise, given what we've been through in the last 6+ months. So I think the question will be, whether ad hoc addressing of particularized issues or a more generic approach, which one's going to be the most effective use of resources. But I think you and I and probably a couple of members of the OPWD team should probably have that conversation to figure out, what the punch list of things that we want to try to address are, because a more broad-based strategy, I'm just not sure that we have the staff resources to support at this particular moment. But as I said at the outset, our intention will be to soon after this meeting to communicate back in writing to the Ddac, hopefully, in a way that you find responsive and thorough, and certainly you can give us, any feedback if we fail to achieve either of those objectives of responsiveness and thoroughness. I'm going to try to just look back into the chat room quickly to see if there are any
Roger, while you're doing that, I think Dolores wanted to have a further comment. So here she is.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to just say I appreciate what you just said, because I was expecting to get responses on our other recommendations for the front door. There were a host of other things that didn't get mentioned. So I'm hoping that we will get a response.
Absolutely. That is. I had hoped to achieve that before this meeting, but I will achieve that, I think, shortly after this meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. There are a number of questions that, looking in the chat room, that are being posed regarding some specific questions regarding self-direction and access to that service. I'm going to suggest that we're going to scrape all those comments and get those questions over to our self-direction liaisons and self-direction statewide program coordinator. It looks like there's a number of specific factual situations that folks are raising that we may need to get some additional program guidance out there. So I'm going to look at there. Ruth Roberts. Yep, Ruth.
Good to see. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I also wanted to mention, and this may have been mentioned previously by Gary, I apologize, I had to just step away for a minute, but also included in the healthcare subcommittee is behavioral health. And I know Dolores, she and I, did some work on this going back several months. But this, this is a work in progress. And so I'm wanting to just remind folks that, that's still an area of healthcare that we need to look at more carefully. When Dolores and I considered this several months ago, we were able to come up with some recommendations, and quite frankly, none of them were going to cost any new money. So that, I think, also warrants us to dust that off and take another look at that, and then come back to this group with specific recommendations or specific areas where we believe more attention needs to be made. We're concerned, of course, for individuals who are dually diagnosed, individuals who have significant IDD conditions, but also have a very real and significant behavioral health condition. And it's important that we have resources available to address those needs at the local and regional level. So I just wanted to, I guess, stick my hand up, but also just remind.
This is Garrett. This is Garrett. We're not done with recommendations. I'm assuming that our committee is still in effect, and that we will bring additional recommendations at any particular time. I believe that's the plan. And certainly the behavioral health are on our list, and we just need to formulate them a little better and get them out there.
Absolutely. So it's certainly up to the Ddac as an advisory body to establish, maintain, discontinue as necessary various subcommittees. So I would certainly leave that up to your collective discretion as to what further topics the committee may wish to explore. And certainly, behavioral health is an incredibly important question, and my ears certainly perked up. Ruth, common sense things that are fiscally neutral are wonderful recommendations to be able to advance. So I'm looking into the chat room just to flip back. There's this, there was further questions about the 20% withhold and applicability to rental subsidies. As I think folks are aware, that has been exempted, and folks are looking for guidance for what happens beyond September 30th, and we are working on developing and sharing that guidance. So that's in response to one of the comments that just came through. And just to repeat the point made earlier, not seeing any other new comments. I'm going to ask Josie, who's our meeting coordinator, if there's anything you want to flag for me in terms of hands up or anything like that.
Roger, my hand is up. It's Margaret.
Oh, thank you, Margaret.
I just wanted to mention that at your suggestion at the last meeting of the statewide Family Support Services Committee, we decided that we would act in a similar manner and come up with recommendations for improving family support services. We've begun the process. We've met among ourselves virtually, and we've invited input from the various local family support coordinators. So we are at work and hope to have something to report in the relatively near future.
Wonderful, thank you. Nick or Michelle, as chair and vice chair, any final comments or thoughts before we conclude this meeting?
Roger, I would just say that, I would ask the subcommittees to go through the recommendations. If we didn't address anything specific, let's identify that and we'll resubmit it to Roger and the team to review and provide us with an additional response.
Absolutely. So to the degree to which when we provide our written response, you feel it's not sufficient, responsive, thorough, et cetera, we welcome the feedback.
Roger, I'm getting some messages to, I think Allison kind of maybe did a little bit of the talk about the Appendix K and, what's going to continue or not continue. There just wanted to be an acknowledgement on the record here that the Systems Subcommittee also submitted some recommendations in regards to that. So Allison, if you don't have those, we'd like to make sure you do.
Yep, we have them, and we are integrating those into our comprehensive, tally of input. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, we got to the pros and cons. We got through the meeting despite some technical problems at the beginning. So thanks to everybody's patience for that. And it was great to be able to hear the responses to the recommendations. I'm sure everybody, I can speak for everybody on that it was great to get that, and we'll look forward to those written responses.
Absolutely. So just want to wish everybody a good rest of your day and continued safety and good health. Be well, everyone. Take care.